Guild Wars 2 has some of the most distinct classes in any RPG, which isn't saying much because the greatest RPGs of the last decade were a remake, a tabletop simulator, and this clunky mess. What immerses me in my character is when their class fantasy fits into how they feel to play on a purely mechanical level, as well as the role that they fit in a team. Guild Wars 2 does this extremely well, but over time, as new elite specializations were added to the game, these distinctions became less clear, and basically every class can play every role to an extent. So you can just choose which class you like the most, and they can do whatever you want. That makes things easy, right? Not quite. That makes it harder to choose which class you want to play because they're all so good and fun to play, and some classes can make choices to play like other classes. Some people might prefer a melee class over a ranged one, but all classes can more or less do both due to having two weapons and the ability to choose a melee weapon and a ranged weapon at the same time. Also, over time, the classes have lost some of their identity due to expansions broadening what each class can do and allowing you to use more weapons that were once exclusive to other classes and specializations. You might end up playing a healer thief or a DPS guardian, or you might just play them both. The true answer to which class you should play in Guild Wars 2 is that you should play them all because it's so easy to gear up alt characters with account-bound progression systems. And believe me, as someone who has played every class in every possible way, it can get addicting making alts, but you still need to start somewhere. That's why in this video I'll be detailing all of the main characteristics of the 9 classes or professions of Guild Wars 2 to help you decide what you want to play. And I'll be covering what I think are the 5 most important categories that the average player cares about when picking their character. First, the theme or aesthetic of a class. For those who like to get into the immersion of their characters, fashion and skill animations play a big role in how things look, which also affects how things feel. If you look and feel good, you probably also have more fun and perform better. There are also 3 different armor types that specific classes can use: light, medium, and heavy armor. While the heavy armor classes have slightly more defense, it's entirely possible to build more toughness, so even the most fragile light armor class can become a massive tank when built to do so. And you can even share gear between characters that have the same armor type. But what matters more with these armor categories is the fashion. Most skins in the game have a light, medium, and heavy version, with light being more cloth and robes, medium being leather, and heavy more plate and chainmail. But there are tons of skins in the game and they get very creative and even go so far as blurring the lines between the armor types. In other words, if you want a specific look to your character, there's 3 classes that you'll gravitate towards. If you want to see specific skins and overwhelm yourself, you can always preview the entire wardrobe list at any main city bank. The second category is class mechanics, or how it feels to play in combat or in a team. The skills you use depend on the weapons you use, but most classes can choose between 2 weapons to use in combat at any time and swap between them to access different weapons, and therefore different skills. There can be massive differences between one class using one weapon and another using that same weapon. For example, a Mesmer uses greatsword as a ranged weapon to shoot laser beams, whereas other classes use greatswords as melee weapons. Also, the Thief, Revenant, and Warrior uses staves to smack enemies with, while other classes use staff as a magical weapon. This means that unless you really care about running around with a specific weapon on your back, it's really the skills that matter, not the weapons that decide those skills. So it's important that you try them all out to get the feel for which one you like. Also, there are unique profession mechanics that each class has that not only changes what skills they have, but how their entire playstyle progresses in combat, which can have many trade-offs. For example, Elementalists have way more skills to use, which requires higher actions per minute than other classes, but those skills are very rotation oriented, so even if you have high ping, you can play it decently by sticking to the flow of skills. But as a Thief or Mesmer, you need more timing than APM to perform combos, which requires faster bursts of input and can be affected by ping more easily. I'll provide some tips for each class that can help you get the feel for the mechanics faster and let you know how to overcome some of the negative aspects of that class. Then I'll briefly detail the elite specializations, which completely change up how a class plays, gives them access to new skills, and often opens up new roles for that class. Because the core classes are usually less powerful than using an elite specialization on that class, how you view each class will often be through the lens of one of the 3 elite specializations for each class. With 9 classes and 3 elite specs each, there are total 27 elite specializations. Finally, I will give my personal opinion on my favorite classes, which although it may be different for you, my reasoning may still be insightful to how each class and their elite specializations ends up feeling when you actually get to play it over time. And of course, we'll use a tier list to help visualize this. I'm not saying it isn't worth playing classes that aren't at the top of my list, just that I have more fun on some as opposed to others. Before we begin, know that what race you pick is entirely up to you, as it doesn't change the class, and that which game mode you play in may entirely change how your class plays. A PvP build is very different from a PvE build, and open world exploration is very different from the open world PvP zone of World vs. World. For specific builds, check the link in the description for fun and effective playstyles for each class. If you don't care about what is fun, you just want to play the most powerful meta builds, then that changes and I won't be covering that in this video. Just check the link to the build list which will reflect those changes. Now let's start with the Elementalist. These light armor wearing magicians conjure the 4 elements of fire, water, air, and earth. Because they are the stereotypical magic users, they often have some of the flashiest mechanics, so if you're into summoning meteors or calling down lightning strikes, then this is your class. Although they can only use one weapon, unlike most other classes, they end up having more skills overall because they have 4 sets of skills, one for each attunement. When you attune to a specific element, you gain access to skills that generally fit that element's role and archetype. Fire is big damage over time, water is healing and slowing enemies, air is burst damage and mobility, and earth is controlling enemies and protecting yourself. By choosing which attunement and skills you want, you can adapt very easily to most situations because you generally want to start in air or fire when doing damage, or earth when you expect the enemy to get the first shot at you. Then if you get hit, you can heal up with water attunement until you're ready to start over. You can build fully for damage and never leave the air or fire attunement, but those who do that learn very quickly why Elementalists are called the downstate class. So at first, it can be very punishing to play, but when you practice Elementalist a lot, it becomes much easier because you get muscle memory for the skill rotation, which can be very scripted in most situations. For example, you usually want to start in air attunement to get out your quick damage at the start, swap to fire to follow up and place down some fire fields, then go earth to combo the blast finishers of the earth attunement with the fire fields that are lingering from the fire attunement to give yourself more might, which means more damage, and finally swap to water to use the few damaging skills you have there, or heal up while you wait for your air and fire attunement to come off cooldown. Also, if you want to get through this rotation faster, you can swap to the next attunement before finishing the animation of the last skill in that attunement. Because swapping attunements has no animation, you can do it while in another skill's animation, meaning you swap attunements sooner, meaning you can start queuing up your next skill immediately and get the attunement swap cooldown to start sooner as well. Now the elite specializations for Elementalist are the Tempest, which enables a support playstyle with auras that provide unique effects that can be scaled up to provide many different benefits, and while in any attunement, you can recast that attunement to overload that element for a long but powerful spell around you. Since this cast takes 4 seconds, it has an epic but somewhat relaxing feel compared to the normally fast-paced Elementalist playstyle. Using these overloads slows down your attunement swapping rotation a lot because you need to wait to use it. You need to successfully get the entire cast off, which can be interrupted, and then it increases your attunement cooldown, but these powerful abilities have a huge reward for the risk you take to cast them. The Weaver is the opposite of the Tempest because it reduces your attunement swap cooldown and allows you to attune to 2 elements at the same time, depending on the order you swapped into them. This means that while you're in air and fire attunement, you'll have access to the air skills on the 1 and 2, and the fire skills on the 4 and 5. Then a dual attack will be available, which is an entirely new skill based on the combo of elements. And if you swap to earth, you then have the first 2 weapon skills as earth, the 4th and 5th as fire, and the third skill as an earth and fire mix. This can be confusing to those just learning it, but for those looking for the ultimate piano experience, performing a Weaver rotation perfectly feels amazing. The final Elementalist specialization is the Catalyst, which doesn't fiddle with your attunements, but instead allows you to create circles on the ground depending on which attunement you're in, which gives buffs, but also creates certain ground areas which are combo fields, and you can combo Finisher inside of these fields for extra effects, such as leaping through a fire field gives you a fire aura, or blasting a water field will heal nearby allies. Catalyst allows more of these combos to happen as a result, and will also give you extra benefits when performing these types of combos to enable you to stack up tons of modifiers and effects. Because the Elementalist has so much versatility and playstyle options due to the vast amount of skills it has access to, it's definitely one of the more fun classes to play for those who want to do everything, but it can be very punishing to play. I love the laid back but epic feeling of the Tempest, which to me is in the A tier. I'm a bit lukewarm on Weaver because there aren't as many builds I like to play as Weaver because of the convoluted dual attunement, so I'll rank that as a C. And Catalyst is generally strong and easy to play but doesn't hit quite as hard thematically, so I'll give it a B tier. Overall, I'll put the entire Elementalist class in the B tier because while it is fun, we need to compare this to the other classes, otherwise they'd all be top tier, and Elementalist is nothing special. Necromancers are the next light armor class, and as you'd expect, they can summon the dead, steal life, and curse their enemies. Although this class is a magnet for edgelords who think everyone's out to get them, it's really them we have to look out for. While they can seem very selfish, they can do tons of damage and rip the defenses of their enemies, which ends up being useful for their teammates if they're on the same target. They do, however, have some of the slowest animations of any class, which leaves them vulnerable to interruption. Their class mechanic allows them to enter Death Shroud, which essentially grants them a second health bar to use as a resource to deal damage and to protect themselves. Because entering their Shroud is such a high impact moment, they can become very survivable when entering and exiting Shroud at the right timing. But while Shroud is very powerful and gives you new abilities, you lose access to your other skills meanwhile. This results in a more straightforward playstyle because you may want to use all of your normal skills before going into Shroud, since you won't be able to use them again until you exit Shroud. Using them before means more efficient time spent during their cooldowns, so you often just rotate through all your weapon skills, swap to your other weapon and use all of those weapon skills, then go into Shroud and use those skills, leave Shroud, and then repeat the process with your weapon skills but from the other weapon. There isn't too much flexibility in how to play Necromancer, but you have plenty of damage to pump out at all times from afar, which makes them a safe and simple option. For elite specializations, the Reaper changes your Shroud skills to be melee oriented, which forces you into more dangerous positioning, but gives you way more destructive force. And once a Reaper gets hold of its enemy, they can't easily get away because of the chills and stuns that they inflict. The Scourge Elite specialization replaces the Shroud with Barrier, which is not as useful as Shroud, but they can share it with their allies, enabling a more supportive playstyle. They leave Sandshades on the ground, which can apply their Shroud skills to those areas for a more strategic area control. The final Necromancer Elite specialization is the Harbinger, which doesn't have a second health bar when entering Shroud. Instead, they stack up Blight, which decreases their maximum health while increasing their damage dealt and health regeneration, making them a high risk but very high reward playstyle. Necromancer is a popular class because it's easy to play and works well solo. Personally, I love the simple but fast and aggressive Reaper playstyle, so I give that an A tier. But Scourge is one of the worst elite specializations to me because the shade control doesn't make sense for the fast-paced and mobile combat of Guild Wars 2, so I put that in the D tier. And Harbinger can be pretty fun, but it can be a bit less accessible to play than the Reaper in some cases, so I'll give it a B tier. And overall, Necromancer will get a B because even though I still think it's pretty fun to play, lately I don't find myself playing it as much because it makes things too easy. Next is the Mesmer, which is the final light armor class and one of the most unique classes in any RPG. It uses illusions and chaos magic for a more indirect approach to combat. In lore, they are some of the most powerful beings because of their ability to manipulate others with their appearance and to use portals to travel quickly between distant locations. This is exactly how they feel to play, because their class mechanic creates illusions which are copies of your character. Using these illusions, you can distract enemies or shatter them for powerful spell effects such as burst damage, dazing enemies to prevent them from using skills, or distortion, which can allow you to continue attacking while invulnerable to everything else. An experienced player may know how to discern between a Mesmer and its clones, but it's still a mental tax, which creates a really immersive and thematic representation of the class fantasy. Despite the powerful effects that Mesmers have, they can be a bit tricky to play because you need to set up your clones before you can shatter them, and they can die before you're ready. Also, timing is very important because many of your skills as a Mesmer have no cast time, allowing you to do big combos in short windows of time. You'll need to practice their combos to be able to pull them off in real time, while also managing the other mechanics of combat. It's definitely not an easy to play class, so some tips I have for new players is that you shouldn't spam your skills off cooldown, especially not your clone generating skills. Try to line them up consecutively where you wait until you can swap weapons to use them so that you can cast the first part, swap weapons, and instantly use the others to be sure you have enough clones to do your shatter combo. Also, your clones are generally tied to a target and will run towards and attack the initial target they're applied to, and so will your shatter effect. So depending on your game plan, you can spread your clones on different targets to daze multiple enemies, or prevent your clones from shattering at the same time, or you can focus them all on the same target to get more burst damage. The elite specializations for Mesmer are the Necromancer, which slows enemies' skill speeds, making it easier to interrupt them, and improves the speeds at which you cast skills or the rate at which they recover. To top all of that off, you can enter a Continuum Rift, which allows you to do huge combos without incurring any cooldowns on those skills. The creativity and playmaking on this class goes even further with this ability, but it can be difficult to land your entire combo within that limited time, so you need to practice it and know exactly the right moment to use it. Then there's the Mirage, which is all about being elusive. You can use your dodges without physically rolling away. It's a blur effect that evades attacks while still allowing you to perform your other skills, and this also enables special ambush skills on each weapon. It's a lot more straightforward than the Necromancer, but you need good rhythm and awareness to time all of your evades perfectly. The last Mesmer elite specialization is the Virtuoso, which is a more simplified version of Mesmer. There are no clones to manage, instead you stack up blades above your head, and you can fire these off whenever you want for projectile attacks without the limitations or benefits of clones. I find the Necromancer and Mirage specializations as some of the most fun in the game because of how unique they are and how they evolve the Mesmer without entirely changing its core mechanics, so they're both an S tier for me. Virtuoso is okay, but the way that it changes the core class mechanic makes some skills awkward since they were designed with clones in mind, and the blades are cool and all, but not always do I want these 5 daggers floating above my head, so I'll give it a B tier. Overall, I give Mesmer an S tier since it's so iconic, unique, and interesting to play. Now the next class is Ranger, which is the first medium armor profession to go over. Although you can just play them as a pure archer, that's not the limit of their potential. There's plenty of weapon skills to choose from, but for the most part, these skills are very straightforward and sometimes give buffs to their pet. Regardless of how you decide to play them, Rangers have access to pets, and while you're leveling up, you need to unlock new pets by finding them out in the open world, which is an interesting progression system that no other class has an equivalent to. Other than the pet, Rangers have pretty basic abilities, so getting fully immersed in the Ranger will require some experience with controlling the pet. You can set the pet to defend, which will automatically make it attack when you enter combat, which is the least amount of investment to manage your pet. You can also control right-click the pet abilities if you want them to be used automatically, or you can set the pet to passive and it will only attack what you order it to, which gives a bit more control but requires much more effort to manage it. Also, you can have 2 pets and swap between them. Swapping pets can be very useful because if your pet dies, then you can't use it until you swap it out or leave combat. But the pet swap goes on a longer cooldown if you do so after the pet dies. So keeping an eye on your pet and telling it to come back to you when it's in danger, or swapping it right before it dies, can help your pet stay in battle much longer. Also, whenever you swap pets, it places the pet right on top of you, which can allow you to use your positioning to manually move your pet. For elite specializations, you have the Druid, which enables a healer playstyle and allows you to enter into the Celestial Avatar mode, which has some new skills to heal allies, disable enemies, or provide powerful utility. Even when playing by yourself, a Druid can be really great because there's always your pet, which you can keep alive with your healing spells. Soul Beast is the next elite specialization you can use, and it allows you to merge with your pet to gain its stats and new skills depending on the type and species of pet. This is great for players who don't want to deal with managing the pet since they can just stay permanently merged. Untamed goes in the opposite direction. Not only do you get to use all of your pet skills manually, but you get even more pet skills to use depending on whether you or your pet are unleashed, which you can swap at any time. There's also extra ambush abilities you can gain depending on the weapons you have, so there's a lot to work with here, which can be a bit overwhelming at the start, but also a lot of options. So I think I would rank Druid as an A tier because the Celestial Avatar skills feel very impactful and useful in many different scenarios, as well as there being many different build paths to go as a Druid. Soul Beast also has a ton of build paths with how many different combinations of pets that exist and the skills you get from merging them, especially because the merge mechanic feels so seamless. It's going to get another A tier. Untamed, on the other hand, feels a bit clunky because of how the ambush skills can be interrupted and they go on full cooldown until your next rotation. Also, the pet control keybinds change between the other ranger specializations, which makes it hard to get muscle memory for it unless you specifically only play Untamed, and because there are just way more keybinds that you wouldn't need to learn on any other class. So I put Untamed in the C tier. Overall, I give the ranger the B tier. The pet mechanic is well done, I'm just not particularly a fan of controlling multiple units, and ranger in general is a bit simplistic, which for some is great, but not interesting enough to keep me playing it for long. The next medium armor class is the Thief. This is your rogue type class that uses stealth, burst damage, and mobility to do its job without necessarily needing to play fairly. While stealth is not unique to the Thief, they do get extra stealth mechanics such as their first weapon skill changing to a stealth attack, which is generally more powerful. So for example, while in stealth, with a dagger, you gain access to backstab, or when using a pistol in stealth, you can shoot off a rapid fire. Thieves also use initiative as a resource, which all of their weapon skills have varying costs to use. Because all skills share the same resource, it means that they all share the same cooldown, and you must make decisions on which skills to use, as you may only have enough initiative to use some, as opposed to other classes which can use all of their cooldowns independently. While this may seem complicated, there's often one skill that is better than the rest for dealing damage on that weapon, and you'll just end up spamming this one skill over and over, which ends up being quite simple in the end. It's better to pool your initiative, or essentially be patient and keep your initiative high so that you can decide to use specific skills immediately as you need to use them, rather than having to wait to use it because you don't have enough resources because you're using your initiative as you get it. Keeping your initiative high can still give you the same amount of damage over time as another thief that plays near the bottom end of their initiative pool, since you regenerate initiative at a constant rate, but having access to more initiative at any given time will allow you more versatility and potential for combos which have more effect depending on the situation. Another thief mechanic is Steal, which teleports you to the target and grants you an extra skill to use depending on what you've stolen from. Some of these skills can be very powerful, and sometimes they can be next to useless. But regardless, the utility of being able to port to your target can help you perform combos, stick to the target, or interrupt enemies depending on your traits. Since Steal has no cast time, you can combine it with any skill that requires you to be in melee range to ensure that you're in range when it goes off. Do this by casting your big skill like a backstab, then immediately press Steal afterwards so that the animations blur together and you port into your skill to hit it instantly. For your elite specializations, the Thief has access to Daredevil, which gives you 3 choices of skills that will replace your dodge. So every time you dodge, you will evade and perform the skill, which can provide combos, move you faster, or throw out daggers. and you also get a third dodge in your endurance bar while other classes only get 2. Then there's the Deadeye, which completely changes the steal mechanic of Thief. Instead of porting to the target, you mark the target from range and gain more generic but reliable stolen skills. Then, whenever you hit that target with any of your weapon skills, you gain Malice towards that target, which you can then use to improve the damage of your sneak attacks against that target. This requires you to tunnel vision on one target more because you only get those benefits on your marked target, but if you get the kill on your mark, it recharges and you can immediately swap to the next target, allowing for a fast chain killing playstyle if you can secure kills fast. Lastly, there's the Spectre, which enables Thief a more unique supportive role. Like the Necromancer, you will gain life force when using your skills, and you can enter into Shadow Shroud, which will tether you to an ally and allow you to use new skills that will damage enemies and protect or heal allies. You also grant allies Venom when supporting them, which allow you to deal damage when they hit their target. So even while helping your allies, you're still putting out damage. Daredevil is one of my favorite specialization and was my main before I fully embraced multi-classing. How fluid it makes the Thief class feel solidifies it as an S tier for me. Deadeye is fun too because its raw output can be insane, but because you have to stick to your marked target, it can feel a bit limiting in some situations. I'll give it a B tier. Spectre is one of the more unique specializations, and I often play this when I want to provide some extra support, but unlike the Druid, it doesn't feel great to play solo, and there's a bit of clunkiness to the Shroud skills, so I'll put it in the B tier as well. Overall, I give the Thief an A tier for its unique playstyle, even if most of the elite specializations don't fit my preferred playstyle. The final medium armor class is the Engineer, which uses gadgets, inventions, and explosives to solve problems. While you only have access to one weapon in combat as an Engineer, you have an entire tool belt which is determined by the utility skills you choose, and you can equip kits such as grenades, the flamethrower, or bombs in those utility skill slots, which can be swapped to at any time to completely change your weapon skills. Because of how the Engineer is designed without a weapon swap, but instead kits and tool belt skills, you essentially have access to all of your skills at any given moment, unlike other classes which have to wait for weapon swap cooldowns or other resources. You rely more on skill priorities than scripted rotations because you have so many choices at one time. This turns Engineer into one of the most versatile classes, and it's often referred to as a jack of all trades. When playing Engineer, it is very important to learn how combo fields and finishers synergize with each other. Essentially, a combo field is an area left on the ground by you or another player that has a specific affinity to it, like smoke, fire, or water. A combo finisher is a skill that interacts with those combo fields to create a specific effect, depending on which finisher you use and which affinity the combo field has. My suggestion is to learn the potential effects of these finishers because it will provide you with so much more sustain and power when playing as an Engineer. For example, using blast finishers in water fields will heal nearby allies, and performing multiple blasts in that can heal your team up even if you're not playing a build dedicated to support. The elite specializations for Engineer include the Scrapper, which allows the use of gyros, which pulls different effects around you, and the Function Gyro, which is useful for reviving allies. This is great for a support playstyle that protects allies, but can also give super speed to allies, which allows them to move faster than they normally would be able to, and since mobility and positioning are so important in Guild Wars 2, this unique buff can be quite useful. Hollowsmiths are a purely damage-oriented specialization, and they gain access to the Hollow Forge mode. While in this mode, they can use very powerful new skills, but they generate heat while doing so. The more heat you have, the more damage you deal, but if you overheat by reaching the maximum threshold, you'll take damage and lose access to your tool belt skills. So you want to enter and exit the forge to maintain your heat levels while not overheating. It's a high risk, high reward playstyle that can be quite punishing at first, but very fast paced for those who can take the heat. The last Engineer specialization is the Mechanist, which grants you a pet Jade mech, which you can customize through the traits and stats you choose. While you lose access to your tool belt skills, there's quite a few combos you can perform with your mech's new skills. Managing the positioning of your mech can add an extra layer of complexity, but most people just enjoy letting the mech autocast by control right-clicking on the mech skills and letting it do its own thing. Scrapper is nice, but it doesn't change Engineer enough to make a big difference in playstyle, so it's a C tier for me, and although Hollowsmith is pretty fun to play, it makes every Hollowsmith playstyle very similar because the forge skills are in every build, and therefore you want to use those powerful skills always, which means I can only give it an A tier. Mechanist is very well designed and fun to play, but for me the reliance on the mech can feel limiting in a lot of situations where the AI doesn't path around terrain properly, so I'll give the Mechanist a C tier. It's not surprising why Engineer is the least popular class in Guild Wars 2, although it's fun to play like all other classes in this game. It has lots of buttons to press, which can be carpal tunnel inducing if you play for extended periods of time. You either need to take breaks regularly, or just chill on the Mechanist every once in a while, so overall I give Engineer a C tier. Now let's start off the heavy armor classes with the Guardian. Think of this like a paladin or holy warrior. They use both martial and magical weapons, but their main mechanic is virtues, which have passive effects that persist until you activate those virtues for a stronger effect, which will remove the passive until it comes off cooldown. You can burn enemies with justice, heal and cleanse allies with resolve, and protect yourself or allies with virtue of courage. On top of this, Guardians will have access to symbols on each of their weapons, which are circles on the ground that damage enemies and give buffs to allies depending on which weapon creates the symbol. So most of the class identity of Guardians is that it works very well in group situations, and because Guardian has such a straightforward rotation where you always want to put your symbols down first since they give you the most value, it's pretty simple to play. But you might become too trigger happy with those symbols and place them in the wrong spot or too soon. If enemies are coming towards you in combat, obviously don't place the symbols on them where they'll just walk out. Place them on yourself and stand your ground as you prepare more attacks during their approach. This way you can gain the benefits of standing in your symbol and damaging the enemy. At the very least, wait until the enemy stops moving before placing your symbols down. Now for the elite specializations of Guardian, there's the Dragon Hunter, which turns all of your virtues into more impactful skills. Most notably the Justice virtue, which becomes a spear that when it lands will tether the target to you and help you deal more damage to them, as well as pull them towards you and potentially into your traps and symbols. You can still heal and protect allies with your Resolve and Courage virtues, and they have some powerful results, but you need to position them more deliberately to get their effects. Firebrand enables a more supportive playstyle by turning the virtues into full-on weapon sets called tomes that you can swap between whenever you want. However, it uses an initiative system like Thieves do for all of your tome skills, so you need to decide which skills to use to conserve your resources. You can spend all of your resources in the Justice tome if you want to deal damage, or all into Resolve or Courage if you want to support allies, or a mix of both depending on the situation. There's a high amount of utility and flexibility that makes this specialization great in most situations. Lastly is the Willbender, which turns the virtues into purely selfish skills that no longer benefit allies, but have movement and high burst damage tied to them, enabling an assassin playstyle, but as a Guardian. I give the Dragon Hunter an A because it's simple but feels great to land your virtue skills. Firebrand an A, even though it's a bit slow, it's still so useful and fun to combo the tome skills in almost every situation. And the Willbender is an S tier for me because I always enjoy the fast and aggressive playstyle along with the core Guardian utilities. So overall I give the Guardian an S tier because everyone wants them in their party, because of their inherent team synergy and ease of play even when solo. The next heavy armor class is the Warrior, which is the Weapon Master of Guild Wars 2. They have access to the most weapon combinations and can even lower their weapon swap cooldown, so they can access their low weapon cooldowns more often. They also build adrenaline when engaging in battle, which they can expend on burst skills depending on which weapons they choose. When you're in an extended battle and the adrenaline is flowing, Warrior feels amazing, but when you can't hit things to get your adrenaline, it can be a lot less enjoyable, especially because most Warrior animations take some time to cook. So most Warriors usually spam their skills out as fast as they can in hopes of getting their adrenaline up as fast as they can, and this isn't a bad idea, but using the skills in a specific order will give a much greater effect. so I suggest when playing a warrior to learn how each weapon kit flows from one skill to the next, depending on the skill ranges and animations. For example, the Axe 2 is very fast at the beginning and end of the animation, but the Axe 3 is fast at the beginning and slower at the end. You can use the Axe 2 into the Axe 3 for a quicker burst, then you can weapon swap after the Axe 3 to overlap or cancel the slow aftercast of the Axe 3. Since warriors with the discipline trait line have a lower weapon swap cooldown, you can use the weapon swap like this more often to cancel the animations of slower skills, especially that big hammer, to push out more skills in a shorter amount of time. For elite specializations, warrior has access to the Berserker, which changes your main burst skill to enter you into Berserk mode. While in Berserk mode, you deal more damage and will have improved burst skills for each weapon, and you'll be able to use them more often. Then, when the Berserk mode ends, you need to wait for the cooldown and to fill your adrenaline bar completely to re-enter it. Spellbreakers focus on disruption and disables because they remove boons from enemies and have access to full counter as their second burst skill, which can block an attack and daze nearby enemies when successfully timing this before being hit. However, Spellbreakers can only spend 1 bar of adrenaline on their burst skills at a time, limiting how powerful they can be in some cases. Lastly, warriors can become the Blade Sworn, which removes access to one of their weapons in combat in return for gaining a Gunblade, which has ranged and melee capabilities, as well as the ability to charge up a powerful Dragon Slash for a samurai-themed playstyle. I give Berserker an S tier for its amazing flow between the burst skills and generally nailing how a warrior should feel. Spellbreaker is interesting, has some cool utility, and landing a full counter feels great, but it is mid in terms of fun compared to other classes, so I'll give it a B tier. Then Bladesworn is a B tier because even though it's one of the cooler looking specializations, the Gunblade doesn't feel great to play. It's clunky and you give up a weapon for this thing you'd rather not have. Overall, I give Warrior an A because it's simple and does what it needs to do, and that's all that a Warrior wants. And finally, the Revenant, which is the last heavy armor class, and only accessible to those who purchased an expansion. Revenants channel energy from the mists, which in game is like the realm of the gods where spirits of the dead go. You invoke the spirits of heroes of the past to use their abilities, and yes, this also means that if your hero isn't a Revenant legend stance, they aren't confirmed dead yet, especially not any fruit vendors. Revenants have a resource that they use to cast their skills, like thieves, but these skills also have their own cooldowns. This energy resource replenishes over time, but also resets when you swap between your 2 chosen legend stances. Managing this energy resource means deciding what skills to use at any given moment by how much energy you have left, how close you are to your next legend swap, what skills are off cooldown, and which skills are the highest priority, which can be a bit convoluted for newer players. Also, your utility skills are not chosen individually like other classes. They are determined as a set by which legend stances you pick. So you have 2 weapon sets and 2 legend stances to swap between. Remember that the skills with the lowest cooldowns and energy costs are to the left of your weapon skill bar, so prioritize using those first since they offer more efficient use of your energy so you can perform bigger combos with more energy costs later on from the skills to the right or in your utility bar. Also try to use up all your energy before swapping legend stances since any unused energy doesn't add to your replenished amount, it's just wasted. The elite specializations for Revenant include the Herald, which allows the use of the Glint stance, which specializes in providing boons to yourself and allies. The Renegade allows you to use the Callous stance to drop spirits down in an area for less mobile but very powerful effects. And finally, the Vindicator changes your dodge to fly you high in the sky before landing, and you can decide what effect this dodge will do from supporting allies to dealing massive damage. Also, you gain access to the Alliance stance, which is 2 stances in one, allowing you to swap between dealing damage and providing healing depending on which stance you're in. I think Herald is pretty boring for the most part, it's mostly just passive effects, so that's a C tier. Renegade spirits feel a bit slow and clunky for the fast-paced action combat of Guild Wars 2, so that's a D tier. And Vindicator is the one saving grace with how many options the Alliance stance gives you, and while I like the jumping dodge, it used to be cooler when it was longer. Now it's too fast and looks a bit strange, so I'll just give it an A tier. Overall, I think Revenant is a C tier class because there's not much build diversity due to the legend stances deciding your utility skills, and the energy system on top of cooldowns makes managing the skills too convoluted unless you're extremely practiced at the flow of your skill priority. Once again, this is my opinion on what class is more fun to play, and placing classes in lower tiers is necessary to differentiate the more fun from the less fun, even though I play and enjoy all classes. And this isn't an assertion on what are the most powerful classes, because I look at this list right now and I see that the Revenant and Necromancer are usually some of the most powerful classes, although that could change at any time. For specific information on leveling builds or what people play in endgame, check the links in the description, but you can also check out my fun builds playlist on screen, and I will see you all next time.